And it appears that we are indeed live. All right, I think the microphone is working. I think the camera is also working. My glasses look crooked, which pisses me off. These are the minor things that trigger my OCD occasionally. I need like this. Never mind, I bent it the wrong way. Like this. All right, hopefully it won't piss me off too much. For those of you who are watching this in real time, please put something in the chat box. Tell me uh, that you can hear me well and that the quality is relatively decent. As you can, those of you who have seen a lot of my live streams know that based on what's behind me, that I am again on travel. I am in a hotel room in Dallas. My office, for my day job, my office is in Dallas, so I spend a good amount of time here. So I've done live streams from this hotel. Internet here is generally pretty decent. So I figured I am going to do another one. There are several things I've been quietly working on in the background, and I thought that were worth revisiting. One of them is that I really wanted to look at um, the new thermals from Armasight. That was kind of a big thing for me. And the guys at Armasight were kind enough to loan me a couple. And what I wanted to do was to look at the thermal. When I looked at a bunch of the thermals at Chat Show, I really liked. All right, Mr. Pete's here. Can hear me fine. Excellent. Thanks, sir. Really appreciate it. So when I looked at Armasight's stuff on a Chat Show, the thermal clip-on that I liked the most was the operator. It looked to be compact. It looked to be very well built. And I thought it was worth testing. So they loaned me one, which is right here. I also wanted to talk a little bit about thermal versus night vision and why they're different. I think I've covered that a little bit in the past, but I thought that maybe it was worth addressing again. Oh, now I see what's wrong with my glasses. Let's see if this is going to be pissing me off less. Yeah, it's a little bit better. So here we are. So since I'm on travel, I didn't bring the night vision one with me. They sent me a night vision clip-on called the Co-LR, LR standing for long range. I think that's one of the larger, more expensive night vision clip-ons. And I've been dutifully running all this stuff side by side, doing quite a bit of testing in low light as the situation allows. So I'm going to show you what this usually looks like. Let me share my screen. And there we go. Here's some pictures from a couple of days ago. Here we go. So I'm not done processing pictures yet, but I thought I'd show you my Lightroom editing screen, and this is basically what it looks like. This is the long range portion of the shooting range where I usually practice, called Zia, just outside Albuquerque, or in Albuquerque. It's right by the Kirtland Air Force Base, and the way the range functions, there are some parts of the range where I can shoot after dark, but where all these guns right now are set up is not one of them. We are set up here on a long range portion of Zia, and what it allows me to do, so after dark I cannot shoot, but I can be there and point optics downrange. We've got metal plates out there, out to, gosh, 800-ish yards, 780 yards, I think, is the longest we have, but there are multiple berms and things like that. And metal plates during the day warm up at different rates than the rest of the environment there does. So even with thermals, I have a good amount of stuff to look at. Also, since we were completely cold, a friend of mine hung out at the range with me in the evening. His name is Steve. He's one of the better PRS shooters in Albuquerque. and he was curious to look at some thermal night vision equipment. So he stuck around with me for a little while there, and what I did, I drove out to a couple hundred yards out and just spent some time there so that he could look at what a warm-bodied object, namely me, looks like with thermals with night vision a couple hundred yards away. Okay. So, what was that? Yeah. So that was one of my evenings. What you are looking at right now, that was my basically relatively standard setup. Let me see if I can find an easy way to zoom in. So this is the Armasight operator in front of the new primary arms PLX compact 1 to 8 by 24. That's the one with the diffractive reticle. So that's a day bright dot. I obviously didn't need a dot for testing thermals, but it kind of gives you an idea of how compact the whole thing is. The day sight is, I think, 9.2 inches long, right? And the operator is comfortably smaller than that. The weight for the Armasight operator is right around 1 pound, 16 ounces. So it obviously makes a big difference for the balance of the rifle, but it's not too bad. The gun itself is technically an AR-15 pistol. It's a 9.68 inch barrel 556 with a faster 1 inch twist. Okay, so that's been sort of my primary platform for testing the operator for now. Originally, I was hoping to go shoot a pig, but that fell through. So I don't think I'm going to be able to take it hunting before I return it. I kind of need to get it back to them. You know, when you borrow ITAR restricted items, you sign a bunch of papers. You tell them I'm going to return it by a certain time. I'm already past that time. You know, they're okay with it. They're quite accommodating, but I don't think I'll be able to go hunting with it, which is unfortunate. I rather like this thermal. The optic that you see behind it. Let me see if I can get a better image. I think it's going to go this way. There we go. So this is a different AR. This one has a Leupold Mark IV HD 2.5 to 10 by 42, and in front of it is an Armasight Co-LR night vision clip-on. Very different beast. This thing is about 2.5 pounds, I think, maybe slightly under that, but very close to 2.5 pounds, so almost 2.5 times heavier than the operator. Much larger 100mm lens. Good Gen 3 tube. I think they use L3 tubes, but I honestly didn't check very carefully. And in the background over there is the Steiner C35 Gen 2 clip-on, which is sort of my go-to clip-on and the one I use all the time. It has very good image quality, and right now it's also very inexpensive. So if your basic question is what clip-on should I buy in terms of bang for the buck, there is nothing better than the Steiner C35 Gen 2 right now for a simple reason. And if my friends from Armasight are watching this, you'll forgive me for saying this. I really like the operator, but you can get the Steiner right now for $1,600. The reason why the Steiner is so inexpensive right now, and I'm going to put a link in the chat box so you guys can see that I'm not bullshitting. Euro Optic has the Steiner C35 Gen 2 for $1,600. The reason why it's so inexpensive, generally clip-ons don't sell super well in the United States, although I like them. I prefer clip-ons to dedicated optics. And if you're curious, we can discuss that. When the good people Steiner designed it, they did not design it with a Picatinny clamp. They designed it the Euro way, so you only attach to the objective bell of a rifle scope. I don't think it's a great way to go most of the time. So my friends at NX Defense, with a little bit of help from me, designed a very simple reverse cantilevered mount for the Steiner. It costs $140. It's available from NX Defense. You know what? I'm going to find it and I'll give you guys a link before I forget. So $1,600 for the Steiner and $140 for the mount. For $1,740 plus tax and shipping, you have a extremely capable thermal clip-on. From a pure shooting standpoint, if they were the same price, I'd probably get the operator. But the Armasight operator is 4K. It is very, very good, but it is 4K. The Steiner is normally over 3K, so the current discounts are kind of probably a temporary aberration. My best guess is that Steiner purchased a bunch of them, and then the economy went down, and there was no Picatinny mount. And they've been sitting on them for a while. They're just trying to clear out some inventory. That's my best guess. Okay. All right. All of this is generally not supposed to be a one-sided lecture, so I see there are a few people here. If any questions about thermal or night vision come up, please don't hesitate to ask. I am going to give a little bit of a night vision versus thermal background here, and then I'll talk a little bit about operator and how the operator and the Steiner looked side by side. I think there are some philosophical differences there, and how the two were, how the two are set up. So it's worth discussing. Before I move on, any general questions? Anything on thermals or night vision, or really anything I normally talk about? Now is the time, because whatever questions you ask now, I do see them in the chat box, and I kind of determine which way the conversation goes largely based on the questions that I get early in the live stream. I know there is a little bit of a delay between when I say things and when you hear them, so I'll give you guys a minute to see if you can come up with anything, and then I'll, depending on what I get, I'll get rolling with what I wanted to talk about. Okay. Mr. Stan targets, is there any thermals or night vision worth buying for under $1,000? No, there isn't. Not that I'm aware of, not that I have seen. So, as I said a minute ago, by far the raging deal on a thermal right now, by far, and it's not really close, is the Steiner C35 Gen 2 clip-on. $1,600 for that clip-on is pretty amazing. For under $1,000, I've seen nothing. Mr. Pete Grant, please detail advanced. That's a good question. Please detail advantages and disadvantages of both thermals and night vision. So that's kind of item number one on my agenda, what I was originally planning to talk about. So you'll hear that background momentarily before I get into the specifics of the Armasight stuff. But good question. Anything else that's been bothering you that you would like to understand better? Please put that in the chat box. For those of you who are not on my website, so this live stream goes onto a bunch of places. It goes to Rumble, YouTube, Facebook again. For a little while, live streaming to Facebook didn't work. Now it does. It goes to X, although I don't really have anything resembling an audience on X. It goes there just for shits and giggles, since it doesn't cost me anything extra. It also goes to my website on locals. Most of my time online is spent on my locals website. You can get there by going to darklordofoptics.com. There is a paywall for some of the stuff. For most of the stuff, there is no paywall, so you can make a free account and you'll get my various emails and updates. One of the things I talked about a little bit a couple of days ago is some of the background on how uncooled thermal imaging developed, and where it developed, and how it all worked. And one of the reasons I am in a position to provide some of that background is that I was involved in it. When this was coming up, I worked at Raytheon Vision Systems in Santa Barbara, where some of the earlier microbolometer, uncooled thermal imaging cores were working on. And the one that I was working on ended up being in the NVGB. Across the street from us was Indigo, which was purchased by FLIR, which became FLIR's uncooled thermal development center and manufacturing fab. Prior to Raytheon, I worked at Teledyne. We were also doing, they were mostly doing cooled imagers. I ended up working for quite a few companies who did this, and now for my day job, I make test equipment in almost any thermal core you see around from the larger makers like DRS, etc., and BAE that people love so much, is calibrated on the equipment that we make at my day job. So I am very much involved in this, and I have been for quite a few years. Generally speaking, when you are trying to see something or trying to image something, whenever we talk about imaging with something, well, like kind of like we see with our eyes, these glasses are gonna just drive me nuts because they're crooked on my face and it's just pissing me off. Like you wouldn't believe. I don't know. I think I was just born defective, and this kind of stuff pisses me off. Oh well. Most of the light you see when you're looking at something with your eyes, the light that you see is reflected light, right? There is some sort of a light source. For example, I'm in a hotel room, there's a bunch of lamps and stuff like that. They emit light. That light is reflected of different objects around you, and that's how you see it. That's how our eyes see. So our eyes evolved to see in a wavelength range where our primary light source, the sun, emits the most light, and it bounces off of different objects, and we see those reflections. However, when we're talking about thermal, we are not talking, for the most part, about seeing reflected light. Thermal radiation is also light, just a slightly different type of it. But when we're talking about thermal imaging, we're primarily imaging emitted light. What does emitted light means? It means that any object that is not at absolute zero is going to be emitting a certain amount of light, thermal radiation, in a particular wavelength range. You cannot see it with the naked eye, but we can make a camera that is capable of seeing it. Traditionally, most of the cameras, whether digital or infrared, etc., they are basically photon counters, where each pixel, like the camera on your cell phone, for example, each key pixel is basically capturing photons, converting them into electrons. Uncooled thermal imaging that we have in our thermal clip-on stuff like that work in a completely different method. And if the technology behind it is of interest, I may or may not have done a live stream on it, but if there's interest, I can talk about it again. For now, the most important distinction is that whether we're looking at emitted light, thermal, or reflected light, day imaging, and night vision. Night vision devices, anything that has something like an image intensifier tube or digital night vision, for example, night vision devices are kind of like seeing in monochrome and greatly amplified. Early night vision devices were looking in a wavelength range. It's called near infrared. So near infrared means that these are wavelengths just slightly longer than what your human eye can see. And that's where the night vision devices work. More modern ones have expanded spectral range, so they can also see visible light to a good degree. That's why, for example, you don't want to flash a flashlight into your night vision clip-on. It will see it and can overwhelm it. Older ones would get damaged, newer ones just shut off. And sometimes they'll have some memory that you need to reset. But night vision devices see reflected light. They don't need a ton of light. What an image intensifier tube does, what an image intensifier tube does, it basically takes very small amounts of light and amplifies them greatly using something called the photomultiplier tube. There is a certain voltage is applied there, so the light coming in get converted two electrons in something called the microchannel plate, and there is a huge voltage potential that avalanches. One electron comes in, 10 million electrons come out, and those hit a force-field screen, and the force-field screen emits visible light that your eye can see. So all of these devices are kind of like wavelength converters. For night vision devices to function, you need some sort of a light source around. You don't need a big one, right? So if you try to use a night vision devices when the sun is out, you'll just overwhelm the night vision device. But something like a little bit of the moon or the stars, or some very distant street lights, something like that, it's more than enough for modern high quality night vision devices. But another thing that's really important to remember here is that night vision devices, most of the ones we have, are fundamentally analog devices. So thermal or digital night vision, for that matter, are basically two things, right? So there's a camera in the front, thermal camera, for example, and in the back there's a micro display with a couple of eyepiece lenses. But at some point, this image gets digitized, and then it's projected back out to your eye via a little micro display. Night vision devices, with image intensifier tubes, for the most part, they are fully analog devices. The light never gets digitized. You never have an electronic image. It may be converted from photons to electrons, from electrons back to photons, but there is no digitization happening at any point. To get it digitized, like you do with an NVGP or something like that, you take an image sensor and put it behind an image intensifier tube with some optics in there. That's how night vision is done in military vehicles, for example. When you have an image from the night vision device on a display inside an image, you have a normal analog night vision, then there is basically a little camera behind it that captures an image. In practical terms, from the standpoint of what you see, I don't have very good images. I tried to take through the scope images, but they didn't look so great. And I figured out why, so I'll need to go and retake them. I'm going to show you a couple. I'm going to see if they are usable. So for example, this is an image. It's a blurry image, not nearly as good as it looks in real life. Through a Mark IV HD with a night vision clip-on. And the top of the berm over there, you see, is about 800 yards, maybe slightly more. From where I am. And again, in real life, it looked much, much better. But even in this image, if I pay attention, I can see where some of the plates are, and I can shoot fairly far away. For example, there is a big plate over in the corner. Was it over there? There's a black plate. You see it? I think you should be able to see my mouse. That's at about, gosh, I think that was 550 yards away. The close plate over here is 170 yards along the berm over here. And again, if you're paying attention, you can kind of tell over here there are some silhouettes and some other stuff. A thermal image, and again, it didn't pan out well, looks a little bit different. You see a lot less structure. This is an image to the Armasight, but I promise I will take better pictures. I have a better picture, but I just didn't have it with me. Another interesting thing to notice, if you're looking at an image through a thermal, the sky will look black. It's not really emitting any thermal radiation to speak of. If you're trying to see the terrain, the trees, the obstacles, the houses, whatever else, night vision is what you want. But if you are planning to shoot something, trying to find whatever you're planning to shoot far away in a night vision device is not any easier. It may not be any harder, but it's not any easier than during the day looking through your scope. It's a little different because it's monochrome, right? So you don't get color separation, but you get a very good idea of a terrain. With a thermal device, it's a little bit different because the way thermal imaging works, there's no concept of light or dark and thermal imaging. Whatever color scheme that we set up, you can change it. You can show warmer objects as white or as black or as red, whatever your thermal device is set up for, and you can change the color palettes. Because usually most of the terrain type objects out there are at roughly similar temperatures, they are not super visible with the thermal. And on top of it, the things that are looking a little bit warmer and those stand out to a thermal may not be the things that you are thinking of. So trying to figure out the terrain using a thermal device is often more than a little bit tricky. However, if you're trying to shoot a warm-blooded mammal of some sort, um, well, the military has their own idea what a warm-blooded mammal is, but let's talk about it in the context of hog hunting, so YouTube doesn't kill the live stream. If you're trying to shoot a warm-blooded object, thermal is usually the better way of doing this, because while you may not see the details of the terrain and the environment especially well, any mammal, any warm-blooded animal, mammal, bird, etc., will be sticking out like a sore thumb. When we look at things using our eyes or through day optics or through night vision, there is such a thing as light and dark. And dark basically means there's just not enough light, so you can't see anything. And lots of light, right? So something looks very brighter. Because thermal devices are looking at light that is emitted, all objects that are not at zero temperature emit thermal radiation, give out thermal radiation. And the thermal camera is sensitive to all of it. So the way a thermal camera or thermal clip on a thermal rifle scope, the way thermal devices show you in image, what sticks out is something that is at different temperature. That temperature may be warmer than the environment or colder than the environment. The nice thing here is that night vision is, as the name suggests, primarily to be used at night. If you try to use it during the day, the amount of ambient light may very well overwhelm it. Thermal devices don't give a shit. Okay, we more commonly use them at night because our conventional ways to target using day scopes are oftentimes not super useful at night, especially if it happens to be a dark night. Thermals don't care. They work during the day, they work during the night. But what thermal devices do need, they do need the temperature differential. So, for example, if you live in a warmer part of the world, so I live in New Mexico, our sun is harsh, and the desert gets hot, right? For this particular imaging session that Steve and I were at the range, I got there a little bit before sunset, and we were able to sit there. And after the sunset, you could kind of see how the environment was cooling down. Different things were cooling at different rates. And as the rocks and the sand and the berms and other things started getting a little bit cold, all sorts of stuff was visible. We saw a bunny roam around at a couple of 100 yards, and clearly recognizable in the thermal that was a bunny. There was a mouse that ran a couple of times at about 120 yards, and I'd be able to take a shot at that mouse comfortably, and you could see the shape well enough to know it was a mouse. One thing that was really, really interesting was that, so we have steel plates out there, and the metal does get warm during the day, and it loses heat at a different rate than the ambient sand and rock environment. So the metal plates were pretty decently visible. And when we were looking through the thermals in front of low power variable optics, if you generally, so you want to initially want to match the field of view of your day optic with the field of view of the thermal, and that usually happens on about 2 power for most thermals, like the ones I had there. And normally, under normal circumstances during the day, how easy would it be for you to use a 2 power optic to shoot, let's say, an IPSC plate at 800 yards? It would be relatively tricky. You may not be able to see it. It requires pretty good vision. However, looking through a thermal device, IPSC plate at 800 yards stood out like a sore freaking thumb because it was still warmer than the environment, and I'd have no problem whatsoever aiming at it. We have a large coyote silhouette there, some lollipops and lipstick and stuff. And with the thermal, you could very easily work out which is which. Okay. All right, Pete, let me know if this all makes sense. Looking at the same silhouettes, for example, with the night vision, I could kind of make out what's what, but it did not look as apparent because the contrast between the target and the environment behind it was not as large. With a thermal device, this contrast was really quite significant. All right, is this all making some sort of sense for you guys? Should I continue with this, or is something unclear? You want me to dig into a little bit more detail on the nerdy technical side of things? I would appreciate a little bit of feedback here because I need to decide which way to take it. Pete Grant makes perfect sense, exactly. So when I was working on the night vision goggle, it was the first fused night vision goggle that's fused an image from a night vision device, image intensifier core, and an uncooled thermal. And the way we did this, there were several different operating modes. One of the modes that made the most sense to me was to take an image from a night vision device. There was a little, camera behind the image intensifier, and overlaid you overlay it with the image from the thermal. And what you do, the edges from the thermal image, you display them as contours overlaid over an image from a night vision device. And that was actually a really, really good combination. For example, when we were in Afghanistan digging through the very, very dark caves in Tora Bora, at some point, it got there so dark that the night vision device would give you nothing unless you used an illuminator. So in order to walk down the cave or walk down that terrain, you needed just a little bit of light in order to be able to navigate and not stumble all over. And walking with a night vision device is an art unto itself. When I watch in a movie somebody with a night vision goggle just running, cross country, just going great and fast as it's Hollywood bullshit. It's surprising and unintuitive. Some people are better at it than others. I'm not very good at it at all. That having been said, right, if you were in that freaking cave and there was a jihadi hiding somewhere, the thermal would pick up anything warm because the walls of the caves were relatively cold. The walls of the cave were relatively cold. So anything warm-blooded really, really stood out. So the consideration was basically to navigate, you need night vision. To shoot, you need thermal. Now, it's not a hard distinction. Obviously, with the night vision, you see terrain, you also see what you might be able to shoot, but or might need to shoot. But the distinction is not as it's not as significant. Okay. All right, there are a couple of comments. Let's see. Casey makes perfect sense. Mr. Rick Hamby says it makes sense. Stay on targets. Now that you say it, the contrast differences seem obvious, but then I would have thought of it on my own. A lot of this stuff is not obvious until you get a chance to really dig into it. At my day job, right? So we're hiring for people, etc. And I do a lot of education, a lot of training, explanation, etc. And the basic adage is that optics is not super complicated, but it is super weird. A lot of your normal intuition is relatively difficult to translate into the optical sciences. Once you do, it all makes sense. I've seen harder fields of study, although obviously on a more complex side, optics is really non-trivial. But the biggest difference at the layman level, which is more or less what I'm trying to explain here, is that the normal mechanical intuition that you have is relatively difficult to apply to various optical considerations. Okay. But Steve, the gentleman that was there with me, he was considering buying a thermal, just didn't want to do it until he gets a chance to look at a couple. So I was happy to provide an opportunity for him to do so. And what he was basically saying was that um, it's different until you look through it, and once you do, you kind of, after a little while, you start getting used to the type of an image. And when you're looking through a thermal, the image is really called a thermogram. And lots of things sort of kind of start making sense. I think in the end of it, he was planning to buy the Steiner because, again, for that price, at the moment, you can't really beat it. Okay. All right, we're all good with this. You want to talk a little bit about specs, what they mean, and how it applies to different units, and what they mean in terms of the clip-ons that I have on hand? Or you want me to dig into the theory a little bit more than this? I'm gonna refill my water glass while you guys are thinking. Mr. Stand targets. Sounds similar to electrical systems, for instance, the difference between impedance and resistance. Pretty much, yeah. Casey, just got my Armasight Operator 640 a couple of weeks ago and love it. I'm not surprised, I'm quite impressed. When messing with the settings, the picture is looking similar to some BAE cores. They're different, but BAE makes nice cores. There's no real magic to BAE cores, and BAE cores are old. BAE is getting out of the uncooled core business. That facility is not continuing. So everybody who was using BAE cores is going to have to switch to something else. I don't know what most of them are going to be switching to. There are several options, etc. The way it was kind of interesting how BAE cores ended up being used by the higher end thermal devices for civilians. When this whole thing was starting out, the basic problem is that the BE was not necessarily the best core. Everybody thinks that like the Trigicon and Waze, etc., were using BE because that was the best core. No, it was a nice core. There was nothing wrong with it. But the reason why it ended up being used is that BAE was willing to work with small customers and small batches and small volumes. Most of the other thermal OEMs at the time, DRS, for example, just could not be bothered unless it's some really fairly large order. For example, all the FWS stuff for the military is these days DRS cores. So, okay, this is the right one. So this needs to, like my glasses being crooked on my face is still pissing me off. It's one of the reasons I wear contacts normally, because this kind of shit just drives me nuts. But where was I? Yeah. So BAE was just much easier to work with, and everybody started working with them. But in the image code was quite good, but there were others that were comparable. What happened, BAE cores until I think now, they never really went digital. They would just have analog outputs, and when you design a camera for it, you have to make all sorts of, you have to know how to work with it. People got very, very good at working with it. Most other manufacturers looking for volumes had to drive the costs lower. FLIR, DRS, DALS, Sofradir, etc. And they invested into more sophisticated readout chips that would digitize things, etc. They invested in wafer level packaging, all sorts of things that make these much less expensive as you can work with different economies of scale. At first, with a good example being FLIR cores became much cheaper. The image quality actually went down for a little bit. Now the latest FLIR core is actually very, very good. The rest has been good for a while, and somebody's going to pick up the slack. There's some new ones coming up. Is going to pick up the slack in the civilian world with BE bailing out. But I will say this: the competition is getting really tricky simply because of how good the Chinese have become. Again, Chinese cores like the one in the Steiner that I'm working with and all that, they are not. There's nothing revolutionary there, right? So the two primary companies in China who make uncooled cores, one got their start copying some of the FLIR stuff, and another one some of the software idea, which is now Linrad. I think that's French, and I think they actually even help IRA set it up, etc. But nothing about the architecture, anything was really changed. They're just basically brute forcing it, making it in large volumes and sorting. There are a couple of very innovating things happening in the uncooled world, and I'm hoping they'll make their way into rifle scopes. They can make a big difference in price. But I have not really. They're getting there, but I have not seen their latest and greatest yet. The way Armasight is doing things, they are, if I understand this correctly, they are getting the pixel layer, basically the pixels that sense infrared light, from the French, from Linred. So it used to be called ULIS, then merged and became Software, and then they rebranded themselves into Linred, LYNRED. So the pixel layer, etc., is made in France, and then Armasight buys that, and I think they buy it like on wafers or something, and then they slice them and dice them, package them up into cores, thermal cores, and integrate them in their own devices. So they're doing a lot of their own work, if I understand this correctly, which is really not straightforward. So kudos to them. I know a couple of people there, so I've been looking at what they are up to quite carefully since then the new Armasight. This is the secondary birth of Armasight started, and one of the reasons I have not really done the review yet is that I was not really super excited about image quality. But I talked to them, and every SHOT Show I'd go look at a couple, and at the past SHOT Show I went and looked at the operators. Says, oh, that is actually looking pretty good, and that's why I wanted to review it. And based on what I've seen so far, I will comfortably be able to add it to my list of recommended clip-ons. Despite it, costing some money, it's about $4,000 usually. It's not bad at all. I mean, and $4,000 for what is basically a US-built thermal clip-on with a French pixel layer is really nice. It's a testament to their efficiency that they're able to sell this thing for $4,000. So I'm pretty happy with what I'm seeing. The way digital cameras and a thermal clip-on or thermal scope is basically a digital camera packaged in a funny way, right? So if you look at this thing, so this is the objective. That's your germanium lens with a reflection of you in it. Let's see, how well can I see? There you go. That's your germanium lens. In the operator, the germanium lens is 35 millimeter. When we talk about thermals, 35 millimeter refers to the focal length of the objective. It does not refer to its diameter. Though in this case, it's very, very close to a diameter because it's essentially an f1, or very close to it, lens. The field of view of it is determined by the focal length of the lens and the size of the array. In the operator, the array is VGA resolution, which is not the highest that's available, but for the longest time you had VGA and QVGA, so 640 by 480 versus 320 by 240, or a little bit more vertically, depending on where the core came from. This is VGA, so it's 640 by 480, and according to my calculations, so I made this Excel spreadsheet where I do all this math, and I basically try to figure out. Let me see if I can pull it up and show you guys. I may have shown it to you in the past. But basically, I use something called the Johnson criteria that were originally developed at Night Vision Labs for night vision devices, and I made a version of it that applies to thermal devices to kind of give me a metric of how far away would I be able to, for example, comfortably engage a pig. Okay, so let's see. Do I have the Armasight in this already? No, not yet. So I'll show you what this thing looks like, and then I am gonna publish an updated table once I add the Armasight in there. Hold on, let me pull up the tab, and you'll see what I mean. So I've been slowly adding the other different thermals that I look at, and the Armasight is not in there yet, but it will be soon. For a device, for example, like for example, Steiner C35 Gen 2 that I also have here, it's actually, this is incorrect, 640 by 512 core. Okay. So it's very interesting. Some of these calculations, is this accurate or not? Yeah, it's accurate. So I calculated this metric I call the maximum targeting distance. And that basically is supposed to tell me that on an animal roughly the size of the pig, how far away will I be able to definitively figure out which part of the pig is which, so that I can accurately aim at the particular spot where the vitals of the animal are to be able to take it down comfortably and relatively humanely. So for a device with a modern 12 micron pixel pitch, 640 by 480 or 640 by 512 image sensor, I am able to shoot at a pig out to about 340 yards. On steel plates at night, and it's going to be the same for the Armasight operator, we are looking at roughly, on the animal size of the pig, we're looking at roughly maximum engagement distance in the ballpark of 350 yards. But on plates, for example, I would have had no issue whatsoever shooting at IPSC silhouettes at double the distance. The ones we were looking at were past 700 yards, and they were standing out very nicely. The basic Johnson criteria originally defined three distances. It's called the DRI framework: detection, recognition, identification. And basically, detection means that at which distance you know there is something out there, and recognition is how far away do you know kind of what class of a creature this is, like quadruped versus biped, that kind of stuff. And then identification is where you can have a relatively positive identification of what it is. For example, where we hunt hogs in Texas, one of the problems there is a lot of cattle on a property, and oftentimes the landowner will live somewhere in the property, and the landowner might have a dog out there, right? So, for example, if the landowner's dogs are running around, you may not want to try to shoot a coyote, right? So, because you can't tell a difference in the dark with any optic. You can't easily tell a difference between a coyote and a dog, unless the dog is some sort of a chihuahua or something with very short legs. But one of the problems, so there's deer, there's hogs, and there's cattle. And you have to be very, very confident about which is which before you pull the trigger. If you shoot a deer during off season, well, that's poaching. And if you shoot a cattle during any season, you just bought that cattle, and that's gonna cost you quite a lot of money. Okay, hold on one sec. Hold on. The gentleman from Armasight is asking if he needs me on this. I wasn't planning to have him on it, but he's more than welcome to join me if he'd like. Nice guy like him. Where was I? Yeah. So with a Armasight operator, the general ballpark, you can basically say that you can detect that there's something out there out to maybe 1400 yards ballpark. And you can figure out if it's a biped or a quadruped animal about 700-800 thereabouts, and you can identify that it is a pig versus a dog versus a deer versus a cattle out to about 340-350 yards. And in practical terms, that is sufficient for most purposes. Hold on a second. I am gonna tell him his gentleman's having dinner with the family. I originally wasn't planning to do this. I just realized I have a free evening, and I figured I'll come and talk about it. I'll do another. Um, I'll explain one of the issues I had during testing. So I do plan to do another live stream on the subject. So and then I'll try to get the guy from Armasight to join me so he can give you guys a little bit more background on the company and stuff like that. Where was I? Yeah. So given these distances for detection, recognition, identification, it's one of the reasons why for general purpose user really like this basic configuration where you have a 35 millimeter lens and a 640 by 480 or thereabouts core. That gives me a really good combination of on one hand field of view, on the other hand engagement distance. So with this combination, your horizontal field of view is right around 12.5 degrees, something like that. And vertical, depending on which exact sensor you're using, is in the 9 to 10 degree range. That roughly matches the field of view of let's say, most low power variables. Again, they vary a little bit. For most of them, it's right around 2 power or thereabouts. And but 2 power doesn't sound like a lot. But when you are, as I mentioned earlier, when you are working with thermals, because the things you may be aiming at are very, very contrasty, it's pretty remarkable how far away you can comfortably shoot with what is essentially 2 power optics, simply because the background is less defined and doesn't stick out nearly as much. Okay. So when I was out testing all these things, the way I had stuff set up, so my Steiner C35 semi-permanently these days sits in front of a Steiner H6XI 2 to 12 by 42 rifle scope. And I found that that combination, that day scope, that thermal, is just about perfect for my 6.5 Grandel. I have a 6.5 Grandel AR with a 16-inch barrel. It's relatively light, relatively handy, good on pigs, good on deer if I was so inclined. It's kind of a nice, very general purpose suppressed AR-15 for me that I can use for honestly for most things if I'm so inclined, and it's reasonably accurate. So if I want to do some longer range shooting, I can do that also. The barrel is kind of on the light side of things on that one, so eventually I'm probably going to replace it with something a little bit stiffer. I do still want it to be not too heavy. I'm probably going to do a carbon fiber wrap barrel. But for now, that works, and it's a very nice general purpose configuration. And then I have a few day scopes I'm testing. So what I did, I put the operator in front of the primary arms PLX C128 by 24, and the night vision, the Co-LR clip, when I put in front of the Leupold Mark IV HD 2.5 to 10 by 42. And then I swap them around a little bit to other things. And as I was looking, I kind of noticed that with the night vision device, I am not really getting the image quality that I think I should be getting, right? At first, I thought that there was something wrong with the night vision clip-on. So moved things around, looked at it without an optic, and realized that the night vision clip-on itself is very, very good. There is some sort of a mismatch between my Leupold Mark IV HD scope and the night vision clip-on. My best guess is that the night vision, Leupold Mark IV HD does not have a side focus, and it has a 42 millimeter objective. My best guess is that it must be focused at a distance that is not the same distance from which the clip-on is projecting the image. The eyepiece of a clip-on is usually not adjustable. There are some that work as day scopes and clip-ons, and then you can adjust the eyepiece, but they usually have sort of a detent setting, and when you run it in the clip-on mode, you need to sit at a detent. When you adjust an eyepiece, it effectively changes the practical magnification of an optic. And the way clip-ons work, they have to be absolute unity magnification. That means the same field of view coming in as the same field of view is coming out. So the eyepiece has to be fixed in place. That means that it is projecting to a day optic. It looks like the image from a clip-on is projected from a distance of some sort, and there is some variance to it. And that distance did not match my Mark IV HD. Neither, and when I started moving things around, that's when I noticed it. I started swapping them, and I realized that both the night vision and the thermal clip-on look much better on the primary arms PLXC. That one because it has much smaller objective, it has much more forgiving depth of field, and so it's easier to match to a clip-on. Both of the clip-ons look much better with the low power variable than with the Mark IV. I messed a little bit with messing with the eyepiece of the Mark IV. I could get the image to look better, but the reticle didn't look great. So I realized that I will need to continue my testing with a different optic. So I'm going to wrap up my review of the Mark IV HD, and I am going to pop the low power variable that is normally on that gun. It's a very, very lightweight 16-inch barrel AR. And then the normal optic on it is a Delta Striker 1-10 by 28, and that one does have a side focus. So it is much easier to get it to work properly with a thermal clip-on. That's one of the things, for example, if you are trying to get some sort of relatively large objective scope to work with a clip-on, having a side focus really helps. Well, that's interesting. So for Mr. Stay on Targets, for a 6.5 grand or 6 millimeter arc, what do you think about the value of carbon fiber wrapped barrels versus an SPR fluted profile like the Faxon or Ballistic Advantage? Well, the carbon fiber wrapped barrels are more expensive and they look cooler. They're not all created equal. I've had pretty good luck with the ones from Proof Research. So I use those. I have 3 of them. I have a 56 barrel from Proof, a 308 barrel for my fix, and a 6 arc barrel for my mini fix, and they are stupid accurate. And the point of impact does not wander around too much as the barrel gets warmer. That having been said, for most people, most of the time, carbon fiber wrapped barrels are not worth it unless you're buying a very nice one and you have a specific weight budget you need to hit and you're going to be shooting relatively far away. The barrel on my 6.5 grand AR, if I remember correctly, it's a gunner profile from Faxon. It's not the most accurate barrel I've ever had, but it is perfectly respectable. And if the fluted barrel is done properly with proper stress relief, etc., generally you will get better performance for your dollar than you do with most carbon fiber ones. It looks like there are some newer carbon fiber or other synthetic material designs coming up. So there may be things there to look at. But at this stage, if I were doing this, if I wanted the ultralight barrel to shoot fairly far away, carbon fiber barrel from proof is probably my best bet. But if I could tolerate just a little bit more weight, I'll go with a steel barrel with properly made flutes any day. For example, the gun that the night vision clip-on was on uses something called the Trident barrel, which is not currently made, but I'm hoping they're going to come back at some point. And the Trident barrel is very, very deep flute, so the barrel profile almost looks like a couple of I-beams, which is kind of weird. But it's very light as carbon fiber ones, and it's impressively stable as it gets heated up. I'm not convinced that long-term carbon fiber wrapping is necessarily the way to go. I've seen some very impressive fluted barrels. But at the moment, if you have the money, it's not a bad option. So let's see. The March 1.5 15x42 would work well with either type of clip-on, wouldn't it? Yes, it generally would. I do have one. I have not, it's on my 8.6 blackout fix. I have not had a chance to test it with these clip-ons, but I will before I send them back. Yeah. Okay. Where was I? Yeah. So one of the interesting considerations with, for example, thermal clip-ons is how high the magnification can use behind it. And it's a very, very common discussion on different forums. People go, oh, I can use mine with a 10 power scope. And other guys, oh, I can use mine with a 6 power scope. One of the things to be very, very clear about is that when you're increasing the magnification day optic, you're just zooming in on a display in the back. You're not really getting any more information out of it. You're basically magnifying what's in there, but the limit of what you're able to see is due to the finite size of the pixels in an imaging camera. And what most people mean when they talk about zooming in with a day scope behind the behind the thermal clip-on, they're basically trying to tell you, okay, when I go zoom up to this magnification, the image still looks relatively smooth, and then I go to high magnification, it starts looking pixelated, and then it doesn't look so great. So all they're doing is exploring the pixel size on the little micro display on the back of an optic. The display on the Armasight, I think, is XGA 1024 by 768, something like that. On a Steiner, I think it's slightly higher resolution. It's about 1280 by 960, something like that. And we tested very, very carefully what day scope magnification I can use without any of this being irritating. Oh, Mr. Gunto, Minnesotan, he's here. Good to see you, Andrew. But where was I? Yeah. So Armasight says that their operator clip-on is good to go with the day scope magnification between 1 and 6. Steiner, I don't think they make any particular claims. So for my eyes, and this will be a little bit individual, I'm pretty comfortable with it up to about 5 power. So because the image is still reasonably smooth, and what happens is that even if I'm not necessarily seeing any more detail, just being able to see the object you're aiming at a little bit bigger helps you, kind of line it up a little bit, at least perceptually. The funny thing here is that given the resolution of the image sensor display, when you're trying to center it and line up and etc., you're not actually lining it up any better, which is kind of interesting. But what it does, it prevents you you from trying to realign it all the time. So just a little bit easier for you to be just a little bit steadier. That's pretty much it. Uh, it's purely perceptual. You're not aiming any more accurately than you are on 3 power or 2 power, but most people prefer to zoom in slightly when they shoot, and I don't really have any real problem with it. With the Steiner, which has a slightly higher resolution display, I was comfortable up to about 6. So there's no real practical difference. I have a lot of experience shooting with thermals, and if you ask me what day scope magnifications I usually shoot at when I'm shooting with thermals, more often than not, I will have thermals set up in front of low power variable, something that goes down to 2 or less. And when I'm looking for something, doing observations, stuff like that, I will typically be right around 2 power. So the setting that I prefer, so the thermals have a 4x3 image sensor, so the field of view is a little bit wider horizontally than vertically. While with the day scope, the field of view is circular. So what I usually do, I'm okay losing the corners from the view of the thermal, and I basically match the circular field of view of my day scope to the horizontal field of view of the thermal, and that's more where I do most of my observation, etc. And when I am shooting, I sort of habitually bump up the magnification a little bit to something in the roughly equivalent to like 3.5 to 4 power of a day optic and shoot there. I don't, if you ask me specifically why I chose that magnification, I honestly don't know. But I have a very strong suspicion that the reason is a lot stupider than you think. I have tens of thousands of rounds of shooting through my 4 power Alcan, which I really, really love, with and without thermals in front of it, stuff like that. And that just happens to be comfortable magnification for me. That for me roughly is the magnification where even if I don't have a particularly good shooting support, the visible wobble in the image doesn't bother me. That's pretty much it. Okay. So going back to the Armasight operator, and we've been at it for a little over an hour. So if you have any further questions, I would suggest you bring them up now, because I'm going to wrap up a little bit with a couple other nuances of the Armasight operator and start wrapping up. I don't need to sleep once in a while. But one of the interesting things, so the core and operator is running at 60 hertz, basically 60 frames per second. And what most thermal manufacturers, especially for the cores that are made in China, they do this kind of a temporal processing, where they take noise correction data and some other stuff from one image frame and apply that as a correction to the next one. Or they will take 2 frames, read the image and calculate the noise correction parameters and stuff from 2 successive frames, apply them to the third one. And what that does is it gives you a very clean, very high quality image. iRay does this, Guide does it, they'll do it to varying degrees. Some do it better, some do it worse. But what it can create, if you are quickly panning, it will create a little bit of the lag in the image. Like as you're panning, the image looks like it's kind of having a hard time catching up with you. You don't see this very much if you have an object moving within your field of view. But if you're panning with a rifle and with optic, you do see it. And for example, if I had the Steiner and Armasight there side by side, and they're very, very comparable in terms of specs and stuff, the same focal length of the objective lens, same resolution of the image sensor. The Steiner, the core is made in China by Guide, and then Steiner does a lot of their own processing. So it's a very, very nice image. In terms of actually seeing the terrain and stuff like that, lots of other subtle contrast features, Steiner was really excellent. Actually, was slightly better than Armasight, although not by much. But Steiner was clearly doing this multi-frame processing, which most of the time is really worth it. And I think you can turn it off. I need to mess with that. I'm going to do a bit more messing with the settings. I don't think I want to turn it off, but it would be interesting to see if it has an impact on how on the slight lag in the image. The image is excellent, etc. But when I'm panning with the Steiner, is a little bit of this lag. With Armasight, they're doing this differently. Based on everything that I can tell with the settings I've tried and all that, Armasight is not doing this multi-frame processing. And what it does, it makes the background, for example, at this range where I do most of my observation, multiple berms and all that, you obviously see where the berms are and all that, but I'm not seeing the grass. I'm not seeing some of the finer features there in the background. But anything that is significantly warmer might be a target. Whatever algorithm the Armasight engineers are using, the, they seem to have subtle but nicely effective boosting of the edges of the warmer object. In this case, it was plates, but for example, I was looking at a rabbit. It was very, very obvious how well defined the rabbit was. So it's kind of a shooter's optic. And there was a gentleman earlier who said he has the Armasight, Casey, right? And it's very interesting. He said it looks a little bit like what I'm seeing with BAE cores. So I've seen a lot of different optics with BAE cores, and one of the arguably one of some of the best image quality anybody's ever gotten out of a BAE core, at least for the same amounts of money, is Envision. And the way Envision does their processing, they're also doing fairly subtle edge enhancement, contrast enhancement, but all the processing happens within a frame. They are, at least they weren't in the past, carrying any of the corrections from the previous frame. So there was very, very little lag. Pixels on targets also does something similar, Oasis, etc. Armasight, I think, is following that same basic school of thought. And when I was panning with a rifle that had the Armasight operator in it, it's running at 60 hertz, 60 frames per second. All right, Mr. Andrew, this is a subject I do not feel comfortable talking about. Thanks for the education, useful info. Anytime. Thank you for stopping by. But with the Armasight, when you're doing this panning, there's no lag. So if I was panning really fast, I'm sure there would be, right? So it's taking images at 60 hertz, and if you move fast enough, you can overpower that refresh rate as well. But there was none of this multi-frame processing. And what this does, you're basically trading off some of the background details that you can get. You can enhance them with multi-frame processing for a complete lack of lag and for being able to enhance the edges of the warm objects, the things that you may be shooting. So it's kind of an interesting thing in that regard. I can make an argument for both approaches. I'll be honest with you. If you're sitting in a blind looking at the feeder, the Steiner's approach kind of gives you more detail. It's going to be easier to pick stuff up. If you are doing a spot and stock and stuff like that, I think Armasight would have an edge. In terms of weight and packaging and size, they're very, very similar to each other. One of the differences between them that is also, I don't know if it's not quite critical, but it's worth noting, is battery life and batteries that I used. Again, there are different schools of thought on this. So, for example, some companies like iRay, Athlon, which is Guide, and others, what they do, they use, oftentimes, not on everything, but on many of the optics, they use custom batteries. And what you can do, you can charge them externally, or you can plug a USB-C port, and it will charge the batteries in the scope, which I really like. I use an Athlon dedicated thermal reference scope. I really like it. And it does that, right? I just plug it into a power bank, and we're good to go. With both the Steiner and the Armasight, they use common batteries, so they cannot be recharged in the body of the scope. Both of them have a USB-C connector, so you can run them off of a power bank. For example, if we're hunting hogs in Texas and I'm sitting in a blind, I'll bring a power bank with me so that I can top off my phone if I'm so inclined, and so that I can also top off, so I can also plug in the thermal clip-on. And that way, what happens is it's not recharging the batteries, but it is running the thermal clip-on, so it's not draining the batteries either. Armasight has two batteries, and these are CR123 batteries. You can use conventional ones or rechargeable ones. And the runtime on two batteries is not super long. It's about 4 hours. And in my testing, it's right around there. I did not time it exactly, but when I got to the range a couple of days ago, I had, let's see, I had two just about dead batteries. I got there around 7. I set things up at 7:15. I pulled the batteries out at 7:20, something like that. I popped into rechargeables, and through a fair amount of use, by 11, I still had some left. So it's about 4 hours ballpark. The Steiner uses two 18650 batteries. And the runtime on the Steiner, and that I've measured, I've had the Steiner longer for the good size, decent batteries, is over 8 hours. If you have the configuration set in the same way. One of the things I don't like about the way the batteries are done on the Steiner is that they are longitudinal to the body. So if you have something with some amount of recoil, basically there are springs holding the battery in, and they're getting weaker with every recoil impulse. But 18650 is a fairly long battery, so you kind of have to do that. With the Armasight, the batteries are set up vertically. Recoil impulse goes this way. So it does not matter what recoil is doing with this thing. Once the batteries are locked in there, recoil is unlikely to do anything to the connectivity. And Armasight, both the night vision and the thermal optic, are rated up to a 50 cal rifle. I don't own a 50 cal rifle, so I'm not going to try to test its durability, although I did drop the stupid thing and it's fine. But that was not me testing durability, that's just me being clumsy. In terms of build quality, since we're kind of on it, the Armasight is built like a freaking tank. It is metal, it is robust, all the controls are good. There are 3 buttons up top that control the whole thing. Using them is not super difficult. The use is fairly intuitive, so no problems there. The business with the batteries, I've heard people complain. Yeah, I can see why. 2 CR123s and 4-hour runtime is not super long. On the other hand, these are very commonly available batteries. My flashlights run off of the same batteries, having a couple with me in the pocket, so I can swap them out. It's not terribly bothersome. So, in other words, this is not something I get super excited about. And again, if I was sitting in the blind, I'd just plug in the power bank and be done with it. It's doesn't really get in the way. Okay, let's see what else before I wrap up. So one of the things I don't like about Armasight, and that is probably my biggest complaint, and I don't have a ton of complaints, I really like this optic, is that the way the menus are done, they're all the way at the edge of the field of view. So you have to have an day optic to use with it. It goes down to low enough power to actually be able to see it. If you are zoomed in just a little bit, you don't see the menus. And I think that's just an oversight. But the nice thing is that if need be, they can probably correct it in firmware. Digging through the menus was pretty straightforward, but again, I've got a lot of mileage with it. It wasn't hard to use. The menu system and the Stein and Burris thermals, I think the best of all the thermals that I've seen. It's nice and visual and self-explanatory. Controls are simple. So there, I think the Steiner has an advantage. But I know a lot of people who use thermals, they're fucking with the menus all the time. I generally don't do it a whole lot. I only change a couple of settings, and the stuff that I use all the time is directly accessible by the buttons. So while I would prefer the menu to be visible a little bit closer to the center of the field of view, on one hand, on the other hand, that's not something that would prevent me from using it. So, Mr. The X, how's each system affected by temperature? It doesn't seem to care too much. So the way uncooled thermal imaging works, generally speaking, the imaging cores are much more sensitive to the ambient temperature than to whatever thermal radiation is coming in. So they all have something called the nuke function. Nuke, NUC, stands for non-uniformity correction. And they will occasionally recalibrate themselves. The way it looks, as the temperature of the device changes due to electronics running or due to the sun heating it, if you're doing it during the day, you'll start seeing noise in the image. And most of what you see what's called column noise. It's like vertical stripes that are making the image a little bit worse. And then the camera, you're going to hear this little click. There's internal shutter moving in, and it will do a click recalibration. And all that stuff goes away. So all of these devices are really designed to track the ambient temperature and adjust for it. If you are talking about very cold temperatures, like Mr. The X, since I don't know who he lives quite a bit further north than I do. If you are talking about performance in very cold temperatures, the devices themselves don't hugely care. All of this will work down to probably -20, -25C. I know they're all rated for storage down to -40. I don't know if all of the electronics in there are rated to work in that cold of a temperature. But the basic thing is that they all have a certain self-heating effect. Once it's up and running, the internal temperature of the case is always a little bit warmer because the electronics are emitting heat. But the batteries, their energy density goes down quite dramatically in cold temperatures. And the basic rule of thumb here with, let's say, with the operator uses CR123 batteries, in warmer weather, I'm generally more inclined to use conventional non-rechargeable lithium CR123 batteries that will give you the longest runtime. However, if I am out there in the winter when it's fairly cold, even for example in Texas, we've gone out hog hunting when it's cold, and nobody thinks of cold when they think of Texas. You go out in the Panhandle, some of the western parts of Texas, out in the plains, the wind picks up. It's cold as fuck. So when I'm out in the colder weather, I'm going to run rechargeables. So rechargeable batteries, the types of cells that are used in them, they don't hold as much energy as non-rechargeables, but they tolerate temperature swings much better. So if I was in a cold environment, I'd probably go to rechargeables. If I was in a warmer environment, I'd just use a regular disposable lithium CR123s. Judah David, thank you for the knowledge. Yeah, anytime. Pete Grant, thank you for the great information. Yeah, absolutely. It is absolutely my pleasure. Okay. All right. So where was I? Yeah. So next step. Excuse me. So I'm gonna redo some of the testing with a couple of other day scopes, mostly with low power variables. I do plan to put both of these in front of the March 1.5 to 15 by 42. A lot of it is more pertaining to the night vision clip-on. I want to spend more time with it. As far as operation of the thermal of the operator, I'm quite happy with it. I haven't, somewhat remarkably, I haven't found anything obnoxiously stupid in it, and I can find that in almost everything. It's a well-rounded device. The specs look pretty good. Some of the engineering decisions, I don't know if I'd do the same thing or not, but I can see where they're doing it. In this case, it's using two CR123 batteries. So you're kind of limiting a little bit of battery life to give a smaller package, a lighter weight, and commonly used batteries. But it's a viable approach. Imaging performance is very good. Lag is very low. It's really, really nice general purpose clip-on. And one of the nice things about it, of the combination of a 35mm lens and a sensor, if need be, I can grab it and use it as a monocular. The image does look a little small, but it's not so small that I can't use it just to look around. Okay. So that's basically it. That's my story on the Armasight operator. I plan to retest with a couple of more different day scopes, just to make sure that my impressions are accurate, simply because I am kind of passive aggressive in that way, and I retest everything incessantly. And after that, I'm gonna do another live stream to kind of wrap up the coverage. And at that point, I'm probably gonna invite a gentleman from Armasight. His name is Steve, nice guy, Steve Lemonov. I'm gonna invite him over to join me, and he can give you a little bit more background on the company as well, and things like that. But barring something unforeseen, I will, I will, I do plan to add the Operator 640 to my list of recommended optics. It does everything well. It's not the cheapest thermal, but far from being the most expensive. And in terms of the bang for the buck, I think it does. Generally speaking, comparing regular price thermals, I think it does very, very well. All right, I've been at it for about an hour and a half, so I'll give it 5 minutes. If there are any other questions, I'll be happy to take them. And if not, I'm going to wrap up and wish you guys a good night. And my tea is cold. Let's see. All right, if there's anything else you got, now's the time. I'm gonna quickly glance on my locals platform. Every once in a while, people put comments there under the video instead of the chat box. So I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. And no, we're all good there. And I think we are. All right, Mr. Dex goes, that's what I have found with most batteries. That's correct. So the chemistry of the rechargeable cells is different than the chemistry of non-rechargeable cells. So, Mr. Casey, where do you think Armasight goes from here? The simple truth is that I don't know. That is a very good. I mean, they are gonna continue building nice optics. I would imagine they'll. I don't have any insight. If I was them as a next step, I would take the operator as a baseline and make a version with a longer lens for more of the longer range stuff. But I don't know. So for the next live stream I do on the subject, I'm going to bring in a gentleman who's in charge of all the marketing and sales and stuff for Armasight, definitely marketing. And he'll probably have much better idea where Armasight goes from here. Given how much work they're doing in the US and how much technical work they had to do, I'm pretty impressed with what they have pulled off. Oh, that's an interesting question from Judah David. Do you think clip-ons are a better value than a dedicated thermal? It varies depending on how you like to shoot and what you want to do. Clip-ons are less popular in the United States than dedicated thermals by a solid margin. And you can sometimes get more for your money. And right now, with Euro Optic, and you can see the link further up. I put in a link to the Euro Optic website. You can buy a Steiner C32 Gen 2 for $1,600 right now. That's a steal. You will not get close to this image quality for this amount of money with any dedicated thermal. I suspect the Steiner discounted it because the sales are not good. Right. So, but you can buy their clip-on for $1,600 and a mount from NX Defense for $140, and that's a lot of performance for the money. For most people, if you let's say you're setting up a dedicated Coyote or Hog rifle that you'll just be using as is, a dedicated thermal for most people will get you a somewhat better viewing image experience. Okay. Me personally, I prefer clip-ons because I do have one rifle with a dedicated thermal and it works well, but the way I use my guns, I prefer to be able to have a day optic and a clip-on that I can pull off and have a normal day optic rifle. So that's just kind of my personal preferences. And in terms of the image quality, I'm pretty comfortable with what I get out of the clip-ons. I know how to set them up, and I use them well. Another thing to consider is that if you are planning to put this thing on anything with relatively significant recoil, most of the dedicated thermal devices, the way the eyepieces are done, you have a pretty solid chance of getting hit in the eye with the eyepiece. When you're putting a clip-on in front of a day optic, the eye relief you have is whatever eye relief you had with the day optic, which is usually longer and more forgiving. So from that standpoint, also there's a little bit of an advantage to a clip-on. But again, a vast majority of the people out there, in terms of the user experience and the sight picture and the weight of the gun, do prefer dedicated thermal rifle scopes. I happen to be in the minority in that I tend to lean a little bit toward the clip-ons, and I'm willing to put up with some of the disadvantages. Best way to do this is to try to get your hands on both and see what will work best for you. I'm sort of in the clip-on camp, personally, but I think dedicated thermal scopes outsell clip-ons in the US probably by a factor of 10 to 1. Well, no, close to it. So. All right. It's been an hour and 30 minutes, so I think I can safely wrap up for today. If there are any questions you guys have that I did not cover, please put them in the comments, and I will try to address everything as quickly as I can. Again, if you're trying to get my attention, your best bet is to go onto my website at darkworldofoptics.com. That's where I spend most of my time on the web. But I will try to look at all comments on all platforms as time allows. Okay. Oh, that's a good question. Anything on the new Envision clip-on? I have not yet seen a production version. I've seen a couple of prototypes, but not a production. I like the prototypes. They're doing some clever things, but I don't do reviews of prototypes. So I think it will be out before the end of the year, but it looks very, very promising. But again, until production models are out, I can't really comment. Okay. So on the Envision clip-on, I'm afraid I'm not a ton of help. Okay. Anyhow, thank you all. Thank you for sticking with me. If you have any questions, you know where to find me, and good night.